Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar titled Botanical Identity Testing, Meet Your Identity Testing Partner for All Your Needs. This webinar will be hosted by Chris Amarias, Chief Scientific Officer, Eurofins Botanical Testing. I'm Amy Knock, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. Chris, I will now pass it off to you. You may begin your presentation.
Thank you, Amy. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day. I'm just absolutely thrilled to be able to chat a little bit about the program that we have here at Eurofins. So with that, hello, my name is Chris. I am the Chief Science Officer of Botanicals at Eurofins. And today's topic is going to be truly that stressing that meet your identity testing partner at Eurofins. This is intended to be more of an introductory webinar about the program that we have over in Eurofins. So a little bit about Eurofins. Most people think of Eurofins as this very large lab network. And I really like to stress that Eurofins provides a very unique service. It is about testing and really providing that feedback and that necessary need to our clients. Really, how I look at Eurofins is we're a service business. We are here to serve all of you. So with that, I have the absolute pleasure of working with several of the Eurofins labs within the US Food Network. Specifically, this webinar is going to be focused on one of our labs, and that lab is in Brea, California. And more so, I just want to highlight the entire team over there. I have the absolute pleasure of representing them during our time today, and I'm truly just representing this outstanding lab. For this webinar, I do want to call out one of the teams because I would not be able to be here in front of you without them and their support. So I would like to just give credit to Scott and Craig and Patrick, Zoe, Tara, Aaron, and Abby. Thank you all for your daily dedication to our HPTLC program. So let's start here. Our supply chain is a very complex one. If you are in any sector of the botanicals, whether you're a grower, a processor, a manufacturer, a brand owner, a retailer, or a distributor, you are within this supply chain. And this supply chain can become very complex. So with that, I'm hoping to at least address some of the complexity and together having us just feel that we can take some of that complexity out of the supply chain. So when I say, where are you in the supply chain? Think about what you produce. So with botanicals, botanicals are truly everywhere. I am incredibly passionate about botanicals. And specifically for our time together, I'm going to be focusing on one of the forms where botanicals enters the supply chain, because there are regulatory differences depending on what your product is and how it's labeled and the intention of its use. So specifically, I'm drawing on an oats example. Oats can be found whether it's food, a dietary supplement, cosmetics, an over-the-counter drug, or a prescription drug. So during our time together, I'm specifically going to be focused on dietary supplements. And with that, I will take a huge breath because most people give a little bit of a wince. Dietary supplements are truly regulated, and they are regulated under 21 CFR 111. I'm specifically calling out these regulations because this is truly going to be the structure that the rest of our time together is really addressing. So specifically under 111.70, the regulations state you must establish an identity specification. So with that, it really has called out, and I'm highlighting that single line that points to identity specification. It does come along in the second part of that paragraph under section 111.70, where it also includes purity, strength, composition, and limit on contaminants. But again, in the CFR, in the Code of Federal Regulations, it's called out for establishing an identity specification. And then if you look at 21 CFR 11.70, it actually specifies some of the examinations that you must include at least one of the following in order to establish that you have met that identity specification. So how you determine if your ingredient or finished product, that specification of identity is met, is what we're going to be focusing on. Again, before I dive into the meat of this webinar, I really want to go back to what are we speaking about and what's in a botanical name. A lot of us are very familiar with the common names. These are some of my personal pictures that I've included. So ginkgo is just this beautiful leaf that you can easily identify it as a whole leaf. And hawthorn and dandelion, specifically with dandelion, we call a lot of things that have that yellow flower a dandelion, but in commerce, specifically, are we calling out a specific type of taraxacum? So when we're speaking about naming plants, there's a very rich history there. I won't go into that history during our limited time. More so, I just want to highlight that we at BREA are standardizing our botanical catalog while using the American Herb Products Association Herbs of Commerce in calling out our nomenclature. Sometimes for common names, there are a lot of different specific botanicals that represent or that can be included in that common name. And then often there are some synonyms for the same plant. So again, in just looking at how do we standardize our nomenclature, we're trying to standardize that, or we're doing our best to standardize it against the herbs of commerce. The other thing is sometimes those plants are not represented in this book. This is where we look at other sources such as Q or Tropicos for those nomenclature names. The other thing is that specifically when we are looking at those herbs in commerce, and as we go into our identity testing, it's not just the botanical name that's important, it's also the plant part. And specifically that plant part has usually a very specific method. Are you looking at those aerial parts? Are you looking at the flower, or are you looking at the root? And we'll get into this a little bit more. The other part of really diving into meeting that identity specification, that identity requirement as part of the 21 CFR 111 is also looking at what is the format of your botanical. So is this a cut and sift, or is this a crude material? So with the crude material, again, is it processed according to a cut and sift type of cut? Is it processed to a tea bag cut in order to fit into that format? Is it powdered? Or are we starting to look at an extract? And again, all of these things come into play, and we'll touch upon those in a little bit. Moving forward. So how can we meet that identity requirement? We measure plants using different techniques. Plants present a few different ways in being able to do this. We can look at plants based on their genotype, their phenotype, or their chemotype. So I've included a couple of pictures and just a little teaser. So looking at it from a DNA point or a morphological or a histological point of view, I'm not going to be touching upon those during this, but please stay tuned. We hopefully will be presenting more material about Brea's capabilities of being able to bring forward those testing mechanisms or those testing methods. Specifically, what I'm going to be focusing on is using the chemical markers that can be tested through chromatography. So liquid chromatography, gas chromatography, or thin layer chromatography. There's also another way that is mentioned when you're looking at plants, and that is using the spectral fingerprint. So infrared, NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance, UV vis, that ultraviolet visible absorbance, or mass spectrometry, or a combination of these chemical detections. I'll briefly touch upon those in a later slide, but specifically, I'm going to be focusing on that HPTLC. When we are talking about looking at those chemical testings, it's those chemical markers that we are measuring. These are those secondary metabolites that plants make, and those markers are impacted by where they're grown on our amazing planet, how they're grown. Are they being wild collected, or are they in agriculture? Are they actually being cultivated? The season and the hemisphere heavily influence those secondary metabolites or those chemical markers. The time of harvest, the age of the plant, the stressors, the actual, how old is that plant material? Has it been sitting around for a couple of years? That will influence it, as well as the processing. So looking at HPTLC, again, HPTLC is the high performance thin layer chromatography. For those of you who are not familiar with HPTLC, it is an amazingly dynamic chromatography. So it's planar, meaning it's flat. You actually are using a flat surface to conduct the experiment. It's an open system, meaning that you don't just put in your sample and everything is performed in a closed system. The analyst does interact with the actual experiment. The amazing thing about HPTLC is that it is flexible and adaptive. It has a wide range of both those stationary and mobile phases. So it is incredibly adaptive, and being able to use it as not only a routine testing method, but also as part of your R&D. You're able to analyze multiple samples in parallel. So in the background on this image, each one of those tracks represents a sample. This is incredibly unique to this type of chromatography, where you are able to analyze multiple samples under the exact same conditions. There's also multiple ways to detect what you're trying to analyze, and it generates a lot of data. So going back to the CFR, we are talking about botanical identity, and then again, one of those approved methods or one of those guidelines for the methodology that's mentioned in 21 CFR 111.75. And under that, there's this lovely phrase that a scientifically valid method. I've included on here a web link that my colleague and friend Jeff Stassi published out on the Eurofins website that specifically speaks to this. What does it mean to have a scientifically valid method? So specifically for HPTLC, this is looking at specificity and selectivity and precision and repeatability. And we'll go into this in a little bit more depth in a couple more slides. But again, this is very different from saying that it has been validated. And that is something to keep in mind. So going to the program in and of itself at Brea, I really like thinking about an identity program having 3 pillars. We're going to start with methods, but those 3 pillars include method, reference material, and results. So diving into the specific program that we have at Brea, methods, we are really pleased to say that we are adopting Pharmacopeial methods. When I say Pharmacopeial methods, what does that mean? So there are global pharmacopeias. Each country, each region has its own history of how to use any type of medicine or any type of drug as medicine. And this is usually a recorded measurement of how do you measure the quality of that material. So in these global pharmacopeias, they have monographs that really truly speak to how do you measure the quality of that material. These monographs allow for many things, as well as just testing for that identity component. So why has Brea why did we choose to accept some of these and adopt some of these pharmacopeias? It's truly to serve our global client group. So all of you probably are moving material from one country to another and coming up against how do you measure that identity as it's moving through your supply chain. So pharmacopeias allow for that testing to happen in an open, transparent way. So again, the pharmacopeias, some of these have been harmonized, but it is usually globally accepted. These methods are open and published. Multiple labs can conduct the testing, and we'll get into this. They have a set known acceptance criteria and what standards need to be used in order to measure identity. So thinking about that global supply chain, by adopting Pharmacopeial methods, hopefully we are serving your global supply chain and being able to move your material around in a very transparent way. Another amazing adaptation that these pharmacopeias truly hold is that they do reflect the country of origin. For some of these, it's a very similar material such as chamomile that might be listed in 3 different pharmacopeias. That monograph might truly represent more of what that material looks like in that country of origin. So in looking at the diverse plants that grow on this planet and also that global supply chain, how can we define a method that speaks truly in a very open and transparent way and also really represent that material that's coming from the country of origin? For some of these pharmacopeias, they have a thin layer chromatography method and not a high performance thin layer chromatography method. So there are ways that we can adapt a TLC method to an HPTLC method. And again, this is just supporting the transparency throughout your supply chain. So one of the things that is important to remember when you're looking at methods for identity testing, it is the fit for purpose and scope. So the Pharmacopeial or compendial method are typically validated. So that is different from it being scientifically valid, and we'll go into the differences in just a moment. Usually the lab demonstrates verification or its ability to actually apply the method correctly. This is a service that Brea conducts for every one of our Pharmacopeial methods that we adopt. So in thinking about this, which method is designed for the material? Is there a method that is designed for the material to be tested? And how reliable or how confident are you in those results? So going back to the original definition of the Pharmacopeia, the identity method depends on the material. So for each of these monographs, there's a definition of the scope. What is within scope and what is fit for purpose for testing that material. When I say fit for purpose, it is truly that that material can be properly tested with that method. So looking at the definition of your method, is this a crude plant material? it will actually list that in the definition of the Pharmacopeia, or if it's processed. If we're talking about ginkgo, is it a 35:1 or a 67:1 ginkgo ratio? Has it been standardized to those glycosides? Are we actually testing against a leaf standard or an extract standard? For these pharmacopoeias, they have that true definition where you are testing like to like, and it is truly defined for that specific material that you're testing. Another example of this is, again, with those extracts. Is it a water extract? Is it a hydroalcoholic extract? Has it been spray dried? For some of these methods, again, it's in that definition. Looking at your global supply chain, though, you might be wondering, well, I don't know if my material does fit these definitions. I spray dry it onto an excipient like maltodextrin. So what happens when you don't have a monograph that fits your material or represents your material? Eurofins, again, is at your service. We are excited about providing that quality assurance that the Eurofins brand represents, and being able to say that we have the ability to do method development that is truly fit for purpose and within scope for your specific material, whether it's qualitative or quantitative for doing your identity method. And again, really keeping in scope, are we demonstrating the character of the material with the identity and purity components, as well as the composition, but truly just keeping that safety component in mind. Some of the things that Eurofins is known for is really being able to bring those quality attributes to inform that method design and development. Are you looking for a validated internal method, or are you looking to partner with a third-party lab as part of your own method validation? When we're talking about method validation, again, this was different from scientifically valid. So when we're looking specifically to validate an HPTLC method, we are looking at specificity and selectivity, precision and repeatability, robustness and stability. Again, this would be a whole other webinar about method validation. What I want to highlight here is the specificity and selectivity and precision. So when we speak about selectivity and specificity, that specificity is it fit for purpose for that specific plant? So that is what sometimes we call those inclusive sets. Have we sourced enough plant material that truly represents the global supply chain in order to meet those parameters and set the criteria specific to that plant? Selectivity is more of that exclusive. Are we selective enough where we are excluding the materials that we don't want to accept? I did say that I was going to highlight one of the spectral abilities. I'm going to speak to that. We do get questions whether or not we can perform some type of spectral method on botanical dietary supplement, ingredients, or finished product. There are multiple warning letters, or 483, that the FDA has issued in regards to this. Specifically, NIR, FTIR, and UV-Vis are not really fit for purpose when it comes to dietary supplement botanicals. They have those methods have their place in more of a quality control production setting for dietary supplements. Again, I'm excluding food and spices and other categories of botanicals, but when speaking to dietary supplements, BREA does not conduct that spectral method. So again, I'm calling out very specific parts of that Code of Federal Regulation for you to look up and inform your quality, or have your quality team inform the rest of your business. So looking at that second pillar, that reference material. So this is your trusted library. So what makes that up? Are all reference material the same? Unfortunately, or fortunately, no, depending on how you want to look at it. Reference material should be traceable. Just as in chemistry, you want to be able to trace that reference material down to a very specific vendor and source. There are two forms of reference material. There's the primary, which again comes with the as usually dubbed certified reference material. So it is coming from a qualified reference material vendor. Within the botanical world, we include some of those vouchered botanical material. So these are preserved materials that confirms identity morphologically, so on its physical realm with histology and how that plant represents. Secondary botanical references is the material that's verified in-house. So at Brea, we have both. We're starting our collection of both of these materials. Really, can we source from enough material from around the world that we can include in that specificity and selectivity when looking at our methods? So that secondary reference material is for botanicals. It's the material that could represent the rest of your supply chain. So different growing conditions. Again, that wild collected versus cultivated material. Country of origin. This is something that I'll talk about in a next slide, but countries of origin actually do present that chemotype in different plants differently. Processing. Processing, again, really impacts or can impact that chemometric or how it is presented chemically when you're going through identity. Has it been steam treated as part of the microbial reduction processing? That actually might impact those volatile oils that you might be using as part of your identity method. Secondary reference material can also be used for your laboratory quality control samples. So this is something that we are building at Brea in order to demonstrate not just the proficiency, but the robustness of our methods. So again, we're specifically looking at that chemical expression. Plants are these absolutely amazing organisms where they're polypharmacies or chemical factories. Again, I mentioned this in an earlier slide, how they are grown, where they are grown, the age of that material, and even the time of harvest can heavily influence how those plants present themselves. I'm going to highlight 4 of these plants just because these are well-known issues when it comes to sourcing your plants and some of the hiccups and challenges that you might experience. So just looking at chamomile, is your chamomile being grown in Mexico or Egypt, Croatia or Austria? If it's being grown as a single crop, how is it being harvested? Is it machine harvested or hand harvested? All of these can actually influence how that plant is characterized during the chemical identity process. Echinacea. Echinacea is a great example. In some places, that echinacea is being grown specifically to meet a monograph. So it is specifically being grown to display those chemical features as part of the strength of that plant. In other places, it's the aerial parts, and they might have up to 3 different harvests. The other 2 plants that I really want to highlight are now something that we're studying in our botanical supply chain. As we move a plant from wild collection into cultivation, that plant adapts to where it's being grown and how it's being grown. So whether it's ashwagandha or rhodiola, again, knowing that that chemical expression can change as you're moving the plant around not just where it's grown, but how it's grown is going to impact your identity method. Also, the age of the material. For some of these plants, if you are harvesting them and sitting on them for a year or 2 years, their chemical expression is going to change. Ginger is one of them. The transformation between gingerols to shogalls is actually a measurement of maybe the age of your material. Others, if you're cutting peppermint and having that cut peppermint sit around for 3 to 5 years, you might be losing some of those characteristic volatile oils. So again, thinking about those reference materials and what can you bring in to really bolster and augment your ability to do identity testing. One of the things that I'm really excited about is at Brea, we have started our herbarium. So what is an herbarium? It's essentially a collection, a library, or in some places, a museum of pressed, dried, and annotated plant specimens. So these pictures do represent what's at Brea right now, with the exception of the lower corner. This is a picture that I took while attending ICSB at Ole Miss, and this was just, again, a representative picture of what goes into the process. So what you do is you take your amazing plant specimen, you press it, trying to really preserve those features, and then you make sure it's dry, just so that, again, you're mitigating mold and you really are preserving that specimen, and then you mount it. With the mounting, there's usually a lot of documentation as exactly where that plant was collected, who collected it, and a bunch of other different features, when it was collected, what time of harvest, and so forth. So again, if you really want to check out different types of herbariums, there are a few real amazing notable ones. So lastly is the last pillar of our identity program, are the results. How do you trust those results? So you will be seeing on our analysis report that we will be including images from the HPTLC plate. We will be denoting the acceptance criteria, including those RF values. So where these bands are on the plate on a measurable scale, the colors and the intensity. For the ones that we are, for actually all of our methods, we will be denoting where that method comes from. Have we tested according to a different global pharmacopoeia, or are we using an internal method? Again, clear language, the botanical name, the plant part, and the format. With some of our methods, the method in and of itself is only specific and selective enough down to report a genus. So you will see that on our C of A's. Again, that identity method is supposed to say whether or not it conforms to your specification. So we will be using language such as it conforms to or does not conform to. And in some cases, it is truly inconclusive. So in adopting these results that you will be seeing, this is part of that third pillar. And this is actually the pillar where I feel that Eurofins has the ability to really serve you. That acceptance criteria, I do want to note that first. So that acceptance criteria and why we're giving it a yes or a no. Does it conform or does it not conform to the article? So with the pharmacopoeias, it actually has a very specific acceptance criteria. All of these are for ginkgo. And that acceptance criteria, specifically if it's in that published pharmacopoeia, tells you what you're testing to. And that way it is a very clear yes, no, it conforms, it does not conform. For some of the pharmacopoeias, they actually do have an acceptance criteria that is 100% matching to the reference material. And that will also be note it in language, in very clear language on your analysis report. So again, we are hoping to really specifically and clearly speak to what we are testing, how we tested it, and whether or not your material conforms or does not conform to that test. There are times that you're still going to get mixed results. There are true challenges out there in our supply chain. Those challenges can be everything from proprietary ingredients all the way down to synthesized compounds that are being added, or really standardized to a very specific compound. So again, it's a conversation. We are more than just giving you a piece of paper of what your material tests to. It is truly trying to find what you are interested in doing. Is it trying to troubleshoot something? Are you looking specifically at your supply chain? Are you in a qualification stage with a specific vendor? Are you just doing your routine vigilance in qualifying or requalifying a vendor, or are you just doing that routine testing that's required of botanical material for that identity specification? Are you trying to look at the absence of something? Again, this is truly the service that Eurofins provides. It is the communication and troubleshooting. It is not just giving you a piece of paper. It is providing this relationship. And this is, I believe, the strongest pillar that our Botanical Identity Program provides to you. Out of specifications or OOSs will happen from time to time. And again, it's understanding that moment in your supply chain and with your quality team that we will be able to have that conversation and really sit down with you. So I love thinking about Eurofins being an extension of your quality program in managing your botanical supply chain. And it's not just about doing that botanical ID, it is what the whole entire Eurofins network represents. We have the ability to conduct all of the testing needs for you to conform to the entire identity, purity, strength, composition, and limit on contaminants requirements for your botanical program. So with that, our next steps and our direction, please feel free to reach out for our botanical offering. At this point, we are in the process of publishing just kind of a very showing of what we have. Right now, we have over 550 botanical offerings with over 1,000 different methods. This is growing. This is something that we are constantly evaluating which other pharmacopoeias and what other methods we can bring online, and also specifically really addressing your needs. The other part of this, and this again is part of the whole entire botanical offering, is looking at those analytes. So it's not just the botanical testing, but that will be for another time. So again, I mentioned Scott earlier in this. Please feel free to reach out to either myself or Scott for any questions, and we would be happy to just address what specific botanicals you want to test. And with that, thank you so much for your time, and I would love to answer any questions. So Amy?
Yes, thank you so much for that, Chris. Chris, the first question asks, do your methods detect adulteration?
Amy, that's actually a great question. So the answer is it depends. It depends on the method, and it depends on the adulteration, or it depends on the material. So something like ginkgo, we know through different publications as well as the American Botanical Council their botanical adulteration prevention program. We are members of ABC. The entire team stays on top of what the BAT program is publishing, as well as other relevant industry publications, as well as institutional publications. So again, that is very specific to the method and the material. Some of the methods, especially the Pharmacopeial methods, some of the methods actually have that specific exclusion criteria built into the method. So that is why we are going to be citing the method, as well as just giving you that acceptance criteria, because in that it will address some of the adulteration concerns. Again, not all methods are perfect, and for some of your material, it's very specific. Some methods don't detect adulteration. Actually, maltodextrin, thinking off the top of my head, Amy, maltodextrin is probably a very good example of that. A maltodextrin might not necessarily be an adulterant per se. It's either a processing aid or it might be part of the material in and of itself. HPTLC is actually not very good at detecting maltodextrin, if at all. So again, consulting with us, having this conversation, maybe an orthogonal approach, that multiple methods of testing that material. And again, stay tuned, a little spoiler alert, but there will be additional methodologies that are coming online where we actually will be able to detect maltodextrin. So again, if that's specific to your material and that's your concern, we will be able to test for that. So messy answer, yes, methods can detect for adulteration, but let's specifically hear your concerns and make sure that we address that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your response there, Chris. The next question is, how do you pick the correct method for your botanical?
Wow, again, good question. So this is what Eurofins does. This is what we do with chemistry as well. This is where we bring our expertise and provide you in that conversation. What specifically are you looking for? For a lot of our methods, we have done a very thorough review of the different pharmacopeias, especially for certain articles in commerce, where one of the logos that I put up in my earlier slides was the HPTLC Association. That is not a pharmacopeia, that's an actual association that does a review of the different pharmacopeias and really publishes the differences between them. So again, this is where our internal expertise combined with your knowledge of your specific material can really come together and synergize so that we are truly testing your material against the best method out there.
Great. Thank you for that guidance. So this one has a couple of different parts to it. What would be sufficient for identity testing for a premixed blended powder that contains botanicals and herbs of over 20 types? And then, and then what would satisfy that regulation? And how do we know if there aren't any adulteration present?
Wow, that's a big question. So first and foremost, the CFR clearly states you have to have an identity method. And I think this has been a controversial piece of it. So if you have 20 different ingredients in a premix, how do you demonstrate that all 20 are there? This is where you have to reach out to a contract lab and basically have them develop a method. The reason why I say this has been controversial in the past is that a lot of companies, this can be expensive. This can be actually prohibitive, or that's what companies were saying. More and more recently, I had the pleasure of attending the Southern California Dietary Supplement Consortium in Costa Mesa just earlier this autumn. And again, FDA spoke to this. This is a requirement. So working with a lab, really trying to develop a test method that is specific and selective enough to test the identity of your material is a requirement. So is there a single, Amy, I think I've heard in the question, is there a single test that you can conduct?
Yes.
Probably the short answer to that is I don't know. Off the top of my head, it's one thing to be able to say that can you test a premix of very specific individual constituents such as a vitamin or a mineral? Yes, Eurofins has been doing this for years. Once you sprinkle in botanicals, just because the complexity of a botanical, you're no longer looking at a single constituent. You're looking at that polypharmacy. Some plants share some similar constituents, some similar chemicals that they create. So again, no easy answer. I'm gonna say, without really specifically addressing that, that specific person who answered it, off the top of my head, there's probably not just a true single test that you can conduct on that material in order to test for identity. Again, let's have this conversation without knowing the specifics.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that guidance.
Was there another piece to that, or did I hit all the points?
No, I think you hit all the points, and as I mentioned, we will certainly follow up with this person after to have a more in-depth conversation. So
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes. The next question that has come in here, does Eurofins use the same method, including adaptations to compendial methods across all labs in the United States, Europe, and other regions?
So no. Specifically, what this webinar is representing is the program that is at the Brea, California lab in doing identity testing there. So there are different labs with different capabilities. So the short answer is, do all of our labs do the exact same method? No.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we probably have time for about 2 more questions. Again, if there's any that we do not address live here, certainly we will follow up. Chris, the next question is, can you provide equivalency studies across the labs?
Again, without knowing the exact material of what you want that equivalency study, I'm going to say yes, let's have that conversation. Again, it depends with that caveat. Are you looking for equivalence in terms of testing to different pharmacopeial methods? That is going to be something that we can discuss. Or are you looking at different labs performing the exact same method? So I'm not sure how to address that question because I don't know what the heart of that question is. There's different ways to look at that. But again, let's have that dialogue. Let's have that conversation.
Wonderful, thank you. And then kind of wrapping it up here with this last question, somebody asks, what if I'm already a Eurofins client, but I'm interested in working with the Brea lab?
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for being a Eurofins client, first and foremost, and easily. You don't have to become necessarily a Brea client. This is a Eurofins network. So just speak to your representative and they will be able to provide that guidance as to how to properly get your material over to Brea so that we can test for it.
Wonderful, that's very helpful. So I think that wraps up our Q&A session today. And again, I want to thank you, Chris, for your expertise and your presentation today. And thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you, everyone. And I look forward to another webinar soon.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.